Fra McCann, thank you for agreeing to talk to us. So, although I described you as being Mr. Falls Road, you're actually not from, you weren't born on the Falls Road.
No.
Where were you born?
Well, I was born in the Jubilee Hospital in South Belfast. My mother lived in Market Street and my father lived in MacDonald Street. And so I think for a while we lived in my granny's house at 66 Market Street. But then we moved to lodging in Joy Street. I think it was 5 families in the one house. And my 2 sisters, Aileen and Geraldine, came after me. They were born in that house also. My memories of it, which is very scant, was that it was a very cold house. You were confined to one room that you rented. Everything was shared within the house, but most of the time we spent was either in my aunt's in Market Street or my granny's in Market Street. It was a short time after that, probably in the later 50s. There was always this thing between my mother and father. My mother always wanted to remain in the market, and of course my dad wanted to move to the Falls. My granny lived in MacDonald Street, so he always wanted to be close to there. He won the pools, and it was a jackpot in the pools at that time. I think it might have been Vernon's, and I think it was £4,700 back.
A fortune at that time.
A fortune at that time. So he bought a house at the corner of Albert Street and Jude Street, and they furnished it, and that's where we lived, and that's how we ended up in the Falls.
I was fortunate enough to know your mother and father, and they never struck me as being a particularly politicised family group. I mean, obviously they were Republicans, they were nationalists, but they were more concerned, as I can recall it, with rearing a big family on a very meagre income.
Yeah.
Growing up, was it a happy family? Were you aware that there was economic hardship around the family?
Well, someone once says to me that there was considerable poverty within the area, quite a lot of poverty, in fact, but nobody knew it because everybody was in the same boat.
Yeah.
And that my father worked as a bookies clerk. My mother at times held down 2 jobs, badly paid jobs, to try to keep the family. I was the oldest of what became 10 children. And you're right, I'd say that we were a nationalist family. My mother and father would have voted that way if they were voting. And I think republicanism came later as things that developed. Yeah, we were a happy family. We were all very close growing up, and that's my memory of the thing. But I still at that time, until probably about 10 or 11 or close to it, I had spent part of my time going back to the market. You know, it was also an area that I loved, and I loved growing up in it, and there was always plenty to do. My uncles were cattle drovers. One of them was the manager of one of the local cattle markets that were in abundance in the market area.
I know this from talking to you before this interview, that you were quite good at school, quite clever at school. Mm-hmm. The expectations from the family, from your mother and father, was that you would kind of do well, get a good job, meet someone, settle down. And of course, that was everybody's plan. That was interrupted by events in August '69. But were you good at school?
Well, it was middle of the road on it. You know that if you went to the thing, I always ended up in the C's, mostly because not because the teachers didn't try the thing, but a lot of it was trying to coax me to stay in school. At that time, I was probably okay at my exams and things like that. I went to St Comgall School till I was 11 years of age, and then ended up in St Peter's Secondary School. I was there from 11 years of age. And to be honest, Joe, when I was a counsellor, I remember being on the Belfast Education and Library Board, and they done a get to know you period where they brought everybody together who was on it to have to to get to know each other and explain what the workings of it. And part of it was pairing two people together to talk about their history at school and things like that. And a guy from Shankill that was paired with me, he had said we were sitting and he talked about school as if it was the most wonderful thing that I've experienced. And I had the complete opposite experience in school. I thought at that time that many of the teachers were very wicked to the pupils. They used very heavy straps to beat people with and things. So it was a mixed experience, especially from 11 years up. Going to school, I couldn't wait to get out of school.
Which brings me on to my next question. Leaving school, where was your first job?
My first job was in the Conway Hotel in Dunmurry.
So what did you work at? What were you doing?
My dad got me that job, and it was as a commie waiter to learn silver service. And over about 18 months, I left school in 1968, so running through into 69. 69, I was working when the Troubles broke out. I was in a place further up in Dunmurry, which would have been a restaurant rather than a hotel.
I want to bring you to that particular period. I know you were quite young, but August 69 changed all of our lives. The events that unfold that we had very little control over.
Yeah.
Can you remember those? And if you can, what is your experience of them?
Well, yes, I remember them, and sometimes you remember it very vividly. I remember and I also remember some of the wee events, although I was very young. I was only 11. I remember and wondering in my own head what was going on. The events of 1964 and the devastating riots. I didn't know what it was about, and it was only in later years I learned it. I always remember my mother pleading with us. We were all kids, and kids like to do what kids do, and but the cat keeping me in, and over the next couple of days, I knew that there was a tension. 1969 was completely different, and because you had large crowds of people right through those first number of days. I think it was the 13th, 14th, 15th of August or thereabouts that had attacked people's homes in Percy Street, Dover Street, Boundary Street, Northumberland Street, and North Hart Street, on the way up a road. That I remember buildings burning. I remember the B specials. I remember standing as a 16-year-old at the corner of Dover Street, and that there was buses across the I think my father had I always remember a man standing at the corner of Ardmall Avenue. Catholic homes were burning, and he was firing a shotgun down at the thing. But the night before, I think my father had been hit with some pellets from a shotgun, and then so there's a lot of mixed memories in there, and I think, but to be honest, with all that, there was that for a 16-year-old. There was that thing of excitement and the thing also. But again, you always remember your mother and father trying to keep you in and saying to you, look, don't be going anywhere near that and things like that. Of course you had to get out and get up and did.
You said that the politics of your mother and father were more nationalist than Republicans at that stage. And I'm wondering, did the events of 69 and then the subsequent attack on that part of the Falls by the British Army during the curfew, did that change their perspective of politics? Did it make them Republicans? Was it their just, you learn by what is happening around you?
Well, I think it played a big part in it. There was a number of things happened just one after another. You had 69, you had Coaches Street just a couple of months later, where all the Catholics were put out. It was fairly close by also. You had the curfew in 1970, you had Bloody Sunday in 1972, rolling right through. You had the Short Strand also. So there was a number of events that shaped not only my parents, but people's lives at that time. And that also changed their politics. I think probably my own involvement as it became that probably hardened it.
I was going to ask you, I know that you later, at the age of 17, I believe, you later joined the IRA.
Yeah.
And so, was it rather than one incident? Was it a series of things that were happening all around you that give you that this is the only way to go? Was it a moment like that?
No, there was a number of moments like that, and there was myself and a number of friends had made attempts to join the IRA in the months running up to that, just after internment.
What does that mean, attempts?
Well, at the time, I remember asking that very question to one of the local OCs, and what he had said, and I'll explain it. He had said, at the minute we have too many volunteers in, and I think the company, which was a local area company in the area, had something like 40 members or something like that, and it was a fairly small confined area at the time. And I remember when I eventually I joined the Féin before I joined the IRA, because that was the only avenue that you could get in to play it. And in and around that community, the Féin was a very active thing, and in many ways in Divis Flats, where it had become the IRA company.
Yeah.
Within the area. So it was from there, and I always remember getting sworn in a flat in Divis Flats, and there was about 16 of us, I think, went into a room.
Mass recruitment.
And this elderly man came in and was giving his lectures, or her bad it was going to be, that if you joined the IRA, it only meant two things. It meant jail or death. And there's nights people will, if you can't get somewhere to stay in, people will turn you in. You'll probably find yourself lying on the hedgerows on the way of a thing. So he says, we'll give you a couple of hours to consider it. And there's only 6 of us came back after it. So I think that but that brought us from the Féin into the IRA. And you were sent for it, but you still kept your ties with the Féin. And I always remember going over to a house in the Falls. We knew there was a meeting on me and another comrade, and rapped the door, and a guy came out who was the local OC, and he says, "What is it?" And he obviously does. He says, "Look, we're not getting anything to do here." That's 1971, and he says, "Look, come on in." And I went in, and there was a couple of people in there who I went to school with. There was a few other ones, and he says, "Look, I'll tell you what it is. There's too many in the company down here." He says, "I can't." He says, "Everybody's shouting out to do some operations or do this or do that." And he says, and he wrote it an address out, which was in Beachmount. He says, "You're now a member of a company." And
you're on the transfer list?
Yeah, I got transferred. I was scared to ask how much for, but so we ended up in Beachmount about September, October 1971.
We mentioned your mother and father, Ruby and Patsy, earlier on. When did they learn? Did you tell them? Did you break the good or bad news to them? How did they pick up?
Well, I think that probably for them became more obvious at the time that you were staying out much later, that you were coming in, and then what you had to do is tell them what you were doing. My father, I believe, was quite proud of it. My mother was concerned about me, and also, but again, I believe would have been proud of the decision that came afterwards.
What followed quite quickly after that was your first bout of imprisonment.
Yeah.
So that was internment?
Well, there was a couple of things. I always, again, we had moved from one side of Albert Street to the other. And I always remember, it was a member of the Workers' Party, and had stopped me and told me, and I actually remember talking to another member of the Workers' Party, former member of the Workers' Party, much later, as a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, that stopped me in the street and told me that the Brits were going to raid my house the next morning, my mother's house, and a number of other houses, and I went round the houses, and I went out, and this was just coming into January 1972, and I went out down to the house and I told my ma, and she went into hysterics. This is the start of it. You're going to stay out of the house. And I'd never really stayed out of the house in my life unless I was going to a football game. And but we came to an agreement that she would lock me in her glass door. And so about 4 o'clock in the morning, or 3 o'clock in the morning, my father had been out. They'd been at the dogs. They'd got a big windfall, and all his mates, I think, might have been in the Royal Avenue Hotel. And up he comes into the room and he wakens me, and he was sitting at the edge of the bed talking to me. And the next thing he went to bed, and I couldn't get back to sleep. But I'd only been lying there for about a half an hour when I heard the glass breaking. And but they couldn't get through the glass window. They were jammed in the hall down the stairs where my mum had locked the door. So I bounced up, put a pair of trousers on or a pair of jeans, and there was a roof run right from the back of our house right across the back of Ladies Street, and right across into it. And I've run across there, and I looked back and I seen the Brits climbing out onto the back of the roof, and it was full of ice, and everybody was slipped, but I was in my bare feet. And I remember jumping down into the yard, and there was an old coal house there, and getting into that and closing the door. So there was a woman came out probably after 5 minutes, but she could hear the Brits shouting, and obviously there was a bit of noise with me getting down into the yard, and she opened the coal house, and frightened the life out of her because I was lying in the coal house trying to think. So she recognised me, and she says, "Young McCann, come on in the house." She give me a blanket and I slept in the tea that night, and a cup of tea, and that really started that whole period, you know.
That bond, and I want to just bring you on further about that, but that bond between the community, the local IRA company, for shelter, for food, for transport, particularly strong in that area of the bottom of the falls. I'm trying to avoid saying the lower falls, the bottom of the falls, but it was particularly strong.
Oh, it was, yeah, and as a matter of fact, you know, that there was quite a lot of people there, and people were continuously getting arrested, and people were replacing them quite readily. We had come back down from Beachmount again, and we were incorporated into the local company, and I always remember in around that period. That's where you made friendships, you made comradeships, you made things, because you were doing things that you normally wouldn't have done in your life, and that made a bond between you.
Imprisonment, and I mentioned your first bout of imprisonment, that was the internment, but imprisonment changed what you were doing from the adventure to the deadly.
Yeah, Joe, the night before Bloody Sunday, and I was arrested shortly after it. There was an old Republican called Squire Maguire who had died. His sister, to be honest, I didn't really know the family because I was fairly young. I think we were originally from Cypress Street. His sister lived in just off Durham Street and Galway Street, and we were doing the Guard of Honour at the coffin, and we were walking it up on the Sunday. At that time, the coffin was allowed into the chapel, and we were going in to do Guard of Honour
with the national flag.
The national flag on it, yeah. But as we come up Durham Street and turned up Davis Street to go by the flats, I always remember a woman running out of Davis Tower out of the flats, and she was screaming and crying, and they've just murdered 9 people in Derry, and we couldn't take it in, and but she was shouting and things. So we went on round the chapel, done what we had to do, and came back round again. And and then the reports started coming in about how many people had died, and that's when things turned for us in our lives. Things turned really serious, and some of the actions that we were involved in.
Many people of this generation now will look at that, a 17-year-old in prison, never in trouble of any sort in his life. He's in prison. Was there a moment? And it was to be one of many prison journeys, I have to say. But was there a moment during that in prison period where you went, "This is not for me. I'm going to try and get a job. I'm going to try and find a girl. I'm going to try and settle down." Was that even on the horizon?
No, Joe. That's one of them things that never ever crossed my mind. You know, and within I think it was about the 14th, the 13th or 14th of February 1972. Myself and a number of comrades were in the flats, and that three of us was arrested, and I ended up in the Maidstone.
Which is a prison ship at Belfast law, particularly harrowing conditions.
Yeah, and it's the strange thing about it is that we went on to the Maidstone after a bout in Hollywood interrogation centre, but when we had went on not long after the escape, and that all my memory served me, all the portholes were closed, so you didn't know it was night or day many of the times. It was constantly hot. That you lived in on beds that you could put up and wrap up, probably like seafaring things. So, but it was overcrowded. Yeah, it was fairly horrible. But it's like everything else. You make what you can out of the conditions that you're in.
And I have to say that in between these bouts of imprisonment, and I'm going to talk a wee bit more about them, that on your release you instantly reported back to the IRA.
Yeah.
The people who you met at that journey, you're a young man, you're in prison with older men, you're in a community that is supporting armed resistance. I mean, is there anyone at that stage who strikes out in your memory as someone who was of influence to you? I know a lot of people you were comrades with, but influenced you.
Well, there was probably many people. I don't think that I can't recollect. Some of the OCs that you had at the time would have been of great influence in it, but again, and through them years, many people were getting arrested and insane and things like that. It was mostly an amalgamation of comradeship and things like that carried you through. You obviously at that period looked at the leadership that existed at the time. You know, I remember during the ceasefire in 1972, when all the companies and the battalions and then companies were brought together. I think I know the 2nd Battalion was brought together at an old place in the White Rock, and Seamus Toomey was there, and Sean McSteefwine was there. To be honest, it was like going to meet the Pope for us, you know. And it was
these were senior.
Well, Sean McSteefwine was Chief of Staff at the time, and Seamus Toomey wasn't that far off it.
Yeah.
And so they were the people that you looked to for leadership, and they were the people that you always looked to for guidance. During that period, during the latter period of 1972, I was only interned for 3 months and had been released. And I always remember, I think it was about October 1972 that we were sent down. There was 8 of us sent down to Cork for a rest period, and they were doing that right across the city. And so it was a fairly, for us, you know, I think I'd been in Dublin once in 1967 to watch Celtic and Shamrock Rovers playing, but go down to Cork. Somebody had hired out a van, and the 8 of us from D Company. There was a couple from C Company, and I think I might have been a couple from the White Rock there also, and we got down, and we were distributed across Cork City. Some people were sent out into Passage West, and we were there about 3. I said we're a family called the O'Sullivans. The man's dead. He was the OC of Cork, and it's just a wee strange coincidence that happened there about a year ago. So the guy brought us round, myself and Buster Traynor, who is now dead also.
Yeah.
And it brought us round. He drove us round, and we were to go to meet somebody. And we got down. He says to me, "Fra, come on with it. Could you come with me?" And I goes round, and we stopped outside this building in Cork City, and this elderly gentleman came round, and he said, "The councillor, Commandant Barry, this is volunteer Fra McCann from Tom Barry
of the Flan column."
Oh yeah, and that was the most amazing thing that England brought back. Where he was just telling us of times back in the day, as they say now, you know. So it was a big thing.
I want to bring you back into Belfast Belfast is in turmoil. There's a regular and ongoing and relentless battle between the IRA companies across the city and the British Army. There's no hold bar. Captured Republicans are being executed. British soldiers are being killed. So you're out at that period for another short period. Again,
6 months.
6 months.
7 months.
And then you're back into the prison.
Yeah.
What age are you at this stage?
18.
So by the age of 18, you've been in prison and out of prison. You've reported back to the IRA on 2 separate occasions. So the IRA is effectively, your
life.
family are
Your
suffering. I want to take you back into prison, and then I want to take you to the escape, and I want to take you to the blocks. So back in prison and the escape.
Well,
and tell us the circumstances of the escape.
Well, in Cage 5, when I went in that time, I was in Cage 2, and Cage 5 was reopened again in March, I think, 1973. And there was quite a lot of people from the Falls who put their names down to go across it, and Ardoyne and Andersonstown, so there, and a number of other areas. It wasn't long before we had dug about 4 tunnels, all cut. Some of them we thought at the time that would have been successful.
While these tunnels are being dug, and while these escapes are being planned, is there constant searches for them by the prison authorities? Is there raids on compounds, on cages? Is this a kind of a battle of wits?
Yeah, well, there always is a battle of wits. In the mornings, at the time, the prison warders would have come in and done a head count in the cage about 7:30 in the morning, as they would have done in the evening. Also, they'd have walked around the cage, and obviously they'd have been checking the wire, checking the different things. So you had to pick your moments. And one of the things that we'd done at the time, Harry Burns, an area volunteer who is also dead now, I was in the half hut in Cage 5, and he says, "Look, we're going to take a tunnel and to get out, but we need to keep it tight." There was only about 14 of us or 18 of us, or maybe not even that in the half hut. So we positioned the thing up, and we started the basis of digging the tunnel.
What did you dig it with?
Well, bearings and different
homemade tools.
It would have been the metal things you took a bed and you dug it. You had concrete to go through. Then you had stones and things like that to get out. You had to screw it off to make sure people fitted through it. It was after a while, but the screws would have come in, and if my memory serves me right, what you had to do, it's unbelievable the amount of dirt that comes out, mostly sand, because it's built in an old aerodrome. Yeah, thank you. And so all the sand that you get what you were doing is putting them in pillowcases and putting them down the inner layer between and the tin hut. That was between the roof and the ceiling, although it was corrugated iron. And nobody knew we were doing it in the cage until we had nowhere else to dump the stuff. But I think the screws at the time may have picked up or an old pillowcase that might have had sand about it or something like that there. So they come and done a full search, but they couldn't find where the tunnel was, because what you done is that once they closed the hut at night, you dug for an hour, but till about half an hour before they came in, and you polished the hut and you had it gleaming. So when they come in, there was no sign at all that anything had been upset. So probably with exception that the hut floor was sparkling. So that from that time we'd become used to digging tunnels. We knew what the crack was. We knew how to dig. We knew what utensil to use, and that was all the whole is in good stead. Because when the camp was burned in October 1974, again my understanding was, I know that Big George Gillen, who was also deceased now, was the OC of the internees end of Long Kesh, and that after there was an instruction went out that people should, to try to escape, people should dig tunnels, people should think And of course, with us having a history of everything, now this was in the midst of just total destruction within the huts were lying flat, and like so people were just lying all over the place. But at the other end of the half hut that we first dug a tunnel in, that we got corrugated iron. We said we would go dig Paddy Joe Rice was the OC of that cage 5 at the time, and we says we would dig a tunnel. So that we knew that the big problem was going to be how we got rid of the dirt. Prison warders were told that they're not allowed out. They're not allowed into the cage. So there was just they were allowed to come in, check the wire to make sure nobody was digging the wire to get out. Little did they know we were digging under it. And we started digging, and we got our pieces of corrugated iron, built it up into a wee corral type thing, and that's where we dumped the thing. We got one of the large tanks, water tanks, that used to be on top of the water tower, and we dragged that round and filled it. It was full of cold water, and that's so that when you got out, you went in and you got all the sand off you and things like that. But one of the most remarkable parts of that tunnel was a guy called Ned McGuire, and Ned was so strong. He used a big heavy metal bar, and he beat the concrete until he went through. But when you're doing it, you obviously have to ensure that it's wide enough to take somebody down. So when you get down through the concrete and you have that out of the road, then you hit the hardcore. So you get that out, and then we started about digging the shaft of the tunnel. And I always remember believe it or not, I was about 7 stone 3 at the time, and so you were myself and another few comrades who fitted that category would have been held by our feet and held into the tunnel so that we could round or square off.
So you're upside
down to square off the first shaft of the tunnel. So we dug down to that thing. But digging along, part of the tunnel, you're always very prone. Tunnels flood, but you're also very prone to it collapses along the way. And that happened. What we tried to do was to shore it up as much as possible with corrugated iron and pieces of wood that would hold it up.
Tell me about the night of the escape.
Well, there was a couple of false dawns in it, Joe, that we had been digging the tunnel. That was, I think we started about the 16th or 17th of October, and we made the escape bid on I think 5th of November. So there was a fairly continuous period of time there, and what had happened was that we were constantly down. But one of the guys who went to escape with us had noticed down the tunnel that that we were veering off, and because we hadn't done anything, that we just says there's a point there we're going for.
Yeah, we're digging in that direction.
Digging in that direction, but we were going way off, and as a matter of fact, I think we were digging ourselves back into the cage again. And he had got this wee piece of wood and just invented this wee thing that he says, look, we're way off here. So we had to regroup and then go up and start to push the sand down there to dig it. Any times there were tunnels or any times there was collapses, we had to regroup and then start to put it together. There was a part of the tunnel that for about 10-12 foot of it, I think, that was continuously flooding, and there was really nothing. We put corrugated iron down there, but there was a part of the tunnel, and it's just a wee amusing part of it, that it was pitch black. So Paddy Joe, being the OC, went over, had built a relationship up with the PO of the prison warders,
prison officer,
and Paddy Joe went over and says, look, some of my men in here have failed and have hurted themselves. I need some wire and some connections and some bulbs. I think so. He gave Paddy something like 250 foot of wire and so many electric bulbs, and of course they went down the tunnel right away, and that was a big help. John Walsack was an electrician, so he hooked the whole thing up. But it was part of it we just said to ourselves, like, this ain't going nowhere. The time we were taking, shoring the thing up, it says, let's just go for it.
So that night, you're right, the tunnel.
Yeah.
This ended in harrowing consequences. A man lost his life.
Yeah.
So just tell me, because we could talk for the next 2 hours about the tunnel. You're down, you're out, you're trying to go through.
Yeah, well, we had come up that day, Joe, and I just had to, and we came up just inside the wire. And
still in the camp.
Still in the camp. And Nipper Welch, and it just amazed me that all these people that I'm telling you about now are all dead. And the thing, Nipper, Jimmy Welch from the Falls, had went down, and we were looking, because the tunnel, we took a tunnel up at a slope to see where we were, and he was messing about. We thought we were going to have to cut the wire, and we were worried. There was rumours that it was a singing wire or something like that there that the Brits had put in, and he put it, and it collapsed on the other side, so it made a hole on the outside also, and we got rid of that there. So we always remember that there was 3 people picked, there were 3 or 4 people picked to go out with small wire cutters, because we didn't know what it was like outside, to cut any wire that may have lay about the ground that would have been difficult for people. Then the first squad was going. That was a hand-picked squad of IRA volunteers from different parts, and then, so they went out first. I was in the second squad that was going out. And when I always remember coming up out of a tunnel, it's the most amazing sight you ever seen in your life. Although it was dark, although it was wet, that it was daylight outside the tunnel. And I came up on this wee grass first, and you crawled across the road in your belly. There was a road that ran along the back of the fence, but you came to this big ditch, and I rolled into it, and the first squad was still in it. And then the rest of the second squad. And so I was about 20 minutes later, and so we all hugged each other and shook hands. And people
You were outside the prison.
We were outside the prison. And we started crawling across in our belly across the land. You could look back, you could see the watchtowers there. It was probably 2 or 3 along the cage or compound that I was in on the football pitch. So we goes along, and we got across, and we came to this wee small road, and the next thing we got the wire, and you could hear some shouting, and you obviously knew that people had been caught coming up out of the tunnel. And the next thing, there was 2 shots fired out, but at that stage there was about 7 of us or 8 of us lying on top of each other, and there was a guy, and there was people that already pulled through the small farmers barbed wire fence, and I remember lying there, and the guy that I know well now pushed through and got in it. He was the last thing, because I always remember the shots being fired. I remember looking around to see somebody jerking, and then from the impact, and it was probably just the way my head was, and the thing. And Q Cooney, who was lying beside me, was shot dead.
Tyrone prisoner?
From Tyrone, very well got.
And at that stage, were you captured?
Oh, we were captured, yeah. The Brits came running across.
How were you treated when you were captured?
Well, treated badly, Joe. What they done was that they started us all on the road, and Q's remains was still lying there, and they had argued or shouted at the time. About getting a priest or getting a doctor, and the Brits were screaming, it's not enough, and priest he needs it, doctor he needs it, a priest, the bee's dead, and all that, all the usual stuff, you know. So I had a start on the road, and I always remember at that stage there was 2 Brits they came along with Alsatians, dog handlers, and they were the hurriest things you ever seen in my life when you were lying there. And you'd already been punched and kicked and beat. But they had these, first I ever seen them thing, they had them on a lead, but it was an extended lead, and they could let them off. And I always remember just the dog bites, the dog bite.
You were bitten a number of times?
About 27 times. So, but at one stage, it just was this is important, you know. At one stage, there was a blue van pulled up, and the the Brits in plain clothes, or guys in plain clothes, got out and took us one at a time. Although they caught people coming up out of the tunnel, that didn't know where it was, that didn't the thing, and they brought you around and they were asking, what compound did you come from? And you just looked, and they started punching the face of you, and they started thing, you won't touch from me a cracker, a big out of surprise, they're busted my nose, but they after a while they just bring you back again, get you down again, then the beating started again, and then they threw us all in the back of a van, threw the dogs in, but they put Cooney's body in along with it, So they drove us round to the cells and put us into the cells.
I want to bring you to what is obviously the most prolific or horrific part of this long period of imprisonment, and it's the lead up to the blocks. So you're back in jail,
yeah.
You're in the Crumb.
Yeah.
So tell me just about that, and then take me to that period in the blocks and the protest.
Well, see, I spent a lot of my protest in the Crumb. I've been sentenced to 3 years.
For what? For
area membership and possession.
Yeah, right.
I'd spent. I got sentenced to 3 years in May 1977. Obviously, the blanket protest had already started. I remember going round. I always remember my dad saying to me, "When you got a committal visit, you were put into the base in the Crumb first." And my dad says, "I hope you're going on the protest," and the thing. And of course, there was never any doubt that you were going to go down that road. But them coming round asking you, saying, "What size do you take?" And I says, "I'm not wearing any uniform."
These are prison warders asking you.
Warders, and they were saying, "Do you not realise that you've only 11 months if you put this thing?" I says, "Don't care." I says, "I'm not wearing the uniform." They brought about 3 different ranks of prison warders around to try and convince me that the thing. So I could put in to the base. I was there overnight. And I remember standing waiting to get something to eat. You got in the lane. A prison warder walked up. He says, "If it's what is it? The uniform's not good enough for you to put on anywhere you go from here through, you'll be going naked." And they get into the cell. So that I remember going back out again, and I was completely naked.
What age were you for at that age?
23.
You're young, very young now.
Yeah. 23 or 24, but and that was my first experience, because you were standing in a lane of other prisoners, most of them completely naked, to get your food. And
I know there was a communication problem, and I know that Kieran Nugent, for instance, and the early prisoners who were already on protest were a factory in isolation, and a lot of the information that was known was difficult to collate and difficult to spread. But had you any sense that this is something that's, in all my periods of in prison, this is something different, this is something that is going to be horrific and horrendous?
Yes, probably. Well, not as horrendous as a thing, but to be honest, and you made many friends and comrades over the period. It wouldn't have stopped me doing it. And one of the things and the interesting thing about the Crumb is that when they were moving me from the base, the B wing, which was the boards of the punishment block, you went out and you had to walk naked from the boards. It was during visiting time, and I always remember walking up, and there was 2 people or 3 people from the falls come down. It was a long thing, and I heard them, Jesus Christ, when they see me walking up naked. And it just so, I always say this because it was probably one of the more humiliating parts of the thing, when it was at a prison warder's changeover. And there might have been, to me, when you go into jail, that it's the biggest place in the world, that the circle was a huge place, and it's only when you go up recently and you see it, it wasn't that big. But we were going through, there was 30 or 40 people. To me then it was hundreds,
Yeah.
And you had to walk through these people thing, and they all started laughing, and I was thinking to myself, my God. And they bring you to the wee gate, and put you behind the wire. And when I say behind the wire, it was a 3-foot fence. They'd run along the whole of one side of B wing with chicken wire above it. That brings me round. There was somebody shouting out the door, "Are you all right, Fra?" And it was Beef Murray.
Another prisoner?
From Beechmount.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy Duffy from Ballymurphy. And then but the way they done it is that, and the old cells in the Crum, that it was difficult to communicate because the window was way up at the bottom of the thing, the cell. That they had you in say Beef Murray in a cell, an empty cell, Jimmy Duffy in a cell, and an empty cell, Ferry Joe in a cell, and an empty cell, me.
The isolation.
Total isolation.
And I know you went on to fulfil your time on protests, and it was horrific. You've given us some examples of it, and we've left out some of the beatings that prisoners received and all of that. You're released from prison. You've been through all of that we've talked about.
Yeah.
At that stage, Fra, you're out of prison. You've come through a horrific prison experience. You're a young man. There's a life in front of you. What is going on in your head? Is it not? I've done enough. I've done my bit. That's it.
I met you.
You met me. So do you go right back into being a Republican activist?
Well, the funny thing about it is my family had got along of a minibus, a local GA club, to come up and collect me, and there was two guys in the minibus that had come up. One of them was Kieran Nugent.
Yes.
And another guy.
Our dear friend.
And a thing. And before I'd got out the gate of the cast, the archive bent over and says, "Are you reporting back?" And I says, "What?" So it ended up, and I says yes, and he says, "Don't touch your hair, don't touch your beard. You're the first person we've got out that looks like a blanket man's supposed to look like." I was the first one that wasn't forced washed, getting out. And he says and go out and have a pint, enjoy yourself tonight, because tomorrow night we need you for something. And he ended up at the Fermanagh South Tyrone, I think it was a Fermanagh South Tyrone dinner, and I goes in and I was petrified. I couldn't stop shaking, and the guy wrote out a couple of notes that I couldn't really deliver, and people got quite emotional, including myself, at the thing. But you had these big people, men, coming over to shake hands, and they were slapping you in the back. I was only, again, when I got out of the blacks, I was 8 stone 3, and they were hitting me big slaps in the back, and they were breaking your hand when they were shaking hands. My God, what have I come into?
You threw yourself, as did Kieran Nugent,
Yeah.
And another group of not early release, but recently released prisoners, into the H Black Armagh Committee and campaign. And while most people were based in Ireland and campaigning, and you actually went everywhere you were asked to go, and myself and yourself were in Cavan for a while, and then we were different places. But you were shipped overseas.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining that because overseas is something that a working class kid reads about. So you were in America, you were in Canada, you were in France, you were right across all of that there. So. And you were deported to America as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. But 2 days after Bobby I went on hunger strike, I was sent to France, and I was there for about 3 or 4 weeks. And that was an eye opener because I'd never really, except going to a football game, I was never out of Ireland and travelled around many places, down into Brittany and a number of places, Lyon, a number of other places there, drumming up support and. For and trying to help and strengthen whatever committees was there, but it was really after Bobby had died, and Bobby hadn't been dead that long when a comrade had come and says to me, "Look, we need you to." Actually, I'm getting it mixed up with the 81. In 1980, I was asked to go to America, and
you were asked or told?
Told.
Okay.
I was told I was going for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And
you would be looked after.
And I have to say, I was really looked after. So, many of the people that I met in America were absolutely wonderful. There were people, whether Irish born or Irish Americans, these were people who didn't have to do what they were doing, and they worked tirelessly. Some of them were holding down 3 jobs, doing whatever they could in between, and they were just so genuine and their commitment not only the prisoners' struggle, but the general struggle here and the thing. And your job was to go out again and encourage as many people as possible to become involved in it. So we went into, myself and a guy from Derry went into Canada, I think it was August 1980, and we went into America that night.
Illegally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as an Irish Republican, was there any other way to do it?
But I have to say, and we're going to move on. I want to move on till your re-involvement in the community. But I have to say that it's clear and obvious that that period of lobbying by yourself and Kieran Nugent and the handful of men and women in America made friendships with people who later became influential politicians, trade unionists, community leaders, and that friendship has lasted to this day.
Yeah, well, one of them, who would be in leadership, ended up, both of us got arrested in New York, and they ended up in the Manhattan Correctional Centre. And amazing illegal immigrant. Both of us as illegal immigrants, but he ended up doing 16 or 17 months on the back of an extradition warrant. So, as part of the wee talk when you're in jail, the people get it, you say, "Well, I done jail in America," you know.
The hunger strike has ended with all the tragedies that we know.
Terrible year.
Terrible time. You're back in Divis, and for those who may not be familiar with Divis, it is what can only be described as a modern, created slum.
Yeah.
People are fighting for proper housing, they're fighting for basic conditions in it. Did you find any contradiction between being an IRA volunteer in an active service capacity and a community volunteer in an active service capacity, or was it just the same struggle?
Well, you become very quickly came to learn that it was the same struggle. That when in 1982, some of us were asked to go down and restructure and reorganise the Falls in terms of the party in the area, and the work with the people that were already there, which was my mother, my father, other people, older people in the area. We went into the common, and we realised that we wanted to become involved. If we were ever going to make a difference, we wanted to become involved in the local residents association. But at that time, the people that run it didn't want us on it because we were Republicans, we were Shinners, and that it would be bad for the association. And until I think it was late 1982, their AGM, and we went in, the place was packed, and people voted us on to represent them in the flats.
You're a community activist. There is a clear indication that if we're going to get anywhere, that the community needs effective representation and accountable representation. You are convinced to stand as a candidate in the council elections. I think the first time you didn't get elected. Second time, apparently you had a brilliant director of elections who ensured that you were going to get elected. You're in Belfast City Council. A whole new world, completely different, completely alien to you as a working class kid in working class areas. How were you treated in Belfast City Council? Elected representative, top the poll.
To see you were doing my director of elections, and I know you were looking at me to say that.
I was
anyway,
actually, yeah.
And a good director of elections you were. Well, you told me I wasn't getting elected, but I got elected. But my first touch with Belfast City Council was one of the women who worked in it had come over and put a tin in my face, and she was lifting a collection.
A collection box.
And a collection box, and I says, "No, Mark, don't you call me a Féin bastard." So that was it, and that was to be the par for the course for the next number of years within it. It's again, it's like how you'd lived your life, or how all of us had lived our lives. You just weren't going to accept it, and where you put people into a couple of different rooms to ensure that when they went in, if you remember at that time, what they were going to try and do is to move all the meetings out of council up into the parks. Parks committee had a big house up in North Belfast, and they were talking about moving the whole thing there, knowing that it would have been difficult. Our lives would have been in extreme danger going there, but it didn't happen. And that went on for, as you know, Joe, you were a councillor yourself, but that went on for a long, long period of time. You know, it ended up people spitting on you, spraying air freshener around you, telling you you're scum. And I know that even when Alex Maskey had come back after being injured or shot by loyalists, that they were taunting him about the wounds that he received. I was getting taunted about my brother who had been shot dead by the RUC. And things. So there was a whole series of things, and it was intimidating. But one of the things is we'd always been told, don't lift your hands. But there came a time in the City Hall where that changed. You know, that they were starting, that Unionists, when a Republican got up to speak, they walked to the bottom of the council chamber and started to heckle. And nobody could get in. So we decided that if one was getting up to speak, then and they came at the bottom of the council, we would go down standing among them, and everything busted
and stop the heckling.
Stop heckling. It ended up in a free for all. It ended up physical, and the unfortunate thing about it is that Alec, who was always fairly tight and fairly hard,
had been a boxer,
was sitting on the benches but couldn't move because he'd been injured. He missed
the fight. Outside, we had the sustained attack on the Sinn Féin membership. Elected representatives shot, injured, wounded, and you mentioned Jerry Adams earlier on. Jerry Adams was one of those. Sean Keenan, Alec Maskey, and many other attacks on people's homes.
And you know more than anybody, because you always ended up going to the houses of people that had been murdered by loyalists at that time for no other reason but that they were nationalists and many members of Sinn Féin.
I do remember very well. Having said all of that, you're a councillor for a long time. It comes the time to move on, Fred. It comes the time to go to the Assembly. And I know you left the council with regrets.
Yeah.
Going to the Assembly, you arrive up at Stormont, the very place that you looked at from afar has been the seat of all of our ills. How was that?
Terrible. No, it was difficult. I always remember getting in, and say my first real experience it was, with some of security when you went in. Many people would have turned their back away from you, and it's so that they didn't have to talk to you, they didn't have to think. And it was, I don't know whether it was you or someone else had said to me before, you're not in them places to make enemies, you're in there to make friends. And I remember one day going in, and the security guy was standing there, and I walked away. I says, hello, and he turned his back, and I grabbed him by the hand. I says, by the way, he says something about go ahead, sir, and I says, I'm Fra McCann, and he pulled me and I grabbed him by the hand. I says, I'm Fra McCann, I'm a Sinn Féin MLA. I says, I'm nobody's sir. And he says, he looked at me and he says, yes sir. I says, I prefer if you didn't call me sir. And I walked on by, and 3 days later he called me to the side. He says, look sir, I says, look, what did I tell you? I says, my name's Fra. I says, Fra. I says, I have to call you out there. I says, well, don't. He says, look, would it be all right if I called it when you went in, and then we'll meet the thing. And it's all about breaking down all that thing, because there were many Catholics and nationalists that worked in Stormont, and the vast majority of them, probably through fear of their own jobs or fear of the thing, many of them wouldn't bother with you.
They were subdued.
Yeah.
Earlier this year, you got, for us all, but mostly for you got fairly devastating news that your health wasn't what we would have hoped, and certainly you would have hoped.
Yeah.
So, I can only imagine. You know, I get a cold and it's a major problem for everybody that I know. I stop taxi drivers and tell them I'm not feeling well, and I'm not even in the taxi.
You've been doing that for 40 years.
I've been doing it
Joe.
for more than 40 years. But how did that come about? How did you get that news? And I'm going to ask you, how do you deal with it?
Well, I was having problems with my prostate, and I hadn't just bothered. And it's the big thing about, particularly obviously men, that think they're invincible and that I'll be all right, and yet people, men don't go and complain about what's wrong, especially to do with prostrates. And but it got to a stage that I'd been really having a difficult time because I couldn't go to the toilet, and Jeanette forced me.
Jeanette's your partner.
Yeah, Jeanette forced me to go to the doctor, and I was I'd supposed to see the doctor a week later, and she says, "Don't wait, come on, hospital," because I'd been pacing the floor for 3 days in a row, and I went up to the hospital, and the next thing they were putting the bag in, and they were putting the thing, and I always remember the doctor that night. He said to me, we were just talking, and I was a big Fermanagh doctor, and he was absolutely wonderful. And he says to me, he bent over and he says, "What made you come to the thing?" I says, "Orange." He says, "You just saved his life. If you hadn't have done it, he'd have been dead within 24 hours. And so he says, "But see, when I get you on the table," he says, "I'm going to put a hole through that prostate and free it up for you." And then from that, they had done a couple of scans and had noticed something. And when I got word to go for a bigger scan, and when I did, Jeanette wouldn't go in with me. She was at the hospital, but she wouldn't go into the doctors. And when I got the bigger scan, I was going for the results, and the doctor brought me in, a guy called Dr. Khan, and he says, "Sit down." He says, "The only way I can say this is to say it." He says, "You've got cancer." He says, "It's an incurable cancer." He says, "You have it on your prostate, but it's also moved across into somewhere else in your thing." He says, "We want you to do another big scan." And that was weeks later. And then when I went, I met a different doctor. And the doctor came in and says, "Look, I have to tell you that it's moved, and you have it in 7 or 8 other parts of your body." And it just explained to me where it is. When I first heard it, and Jeanette wasn't with me, and I says, "Look, could you do me a favour? My partner's sitting outside there." He says, he goes out, and the doctor went out, and he was shouting, "Jeanette, Jeanette," and she looked, and she says to me after it, she knew there was something wrong.
Yeah.
And so she brought in, she says, "What's wrong?" And he told her that an incurable cancer. So that was basically it. And but again, the doctors and the nurses and everybody I met have been absolutely wonderful in the way they treated you and the way they deal with you.
The question I was going to ask you was, you took a very courageous step, I believe, in the middle of all this bad news, that you would go public and you would encourage others to check their prostate, to go to the doctor and all of that. What prompted you to go public? Because I would imagine if I got health news, serious health news, that I would pull the bed cover over my head and try and let on it didn't happen.
So when I was told, it was a shock. But in the aftermath of it, I always remember somebody saying to me, as a matter of fact, I think it was Big Bobby Story had said it. He says, and it was either phone me now and again, especially with his own illness, he says, "None of us ever thought would be about today." And so when you look at things like that there, that it's just another challenge in life, and you need to treat it like that there. And I think that's the important thing. It's another battle that you have to fight, and so that held it, and probably a loving family that helps you along the way. Sometimes I wonder how the stigma.
I wonder that too.
Oh no, don't believe me. Yeah, but no, so that's it. But you have to make do. You have to live with it. I'm getting treatment for the cancer, and it's just something that you have to.
And I have to
But sorry,
say,
could I say this?
yes, of course.
One of the other things was in the small circle that I would have socialised with. There's a couple of people would have think a number. I started to realise that that's it. How many people, like Danny Lavery, a personal friend, prostate cancer. A couple of other ones in the place that I would socialise, prostate cancer, and then, so I don't know whether it was a drink or the.
Well, the point you're making that it's more common than people would think.
And I wanted to. Somebody had said to me, "You should do something about that." And like the position that you're in, you could do something. And so I ended up doing the interview in the Irish News. It ended up much wider than just the thing. And I was really, really happy with the way the thing turned out, and I was glad I'd done it, because there's people that have stopped me, especially women who stopped me and says, "I read your article, Fra, and I made him go to the doctor, and now he's getting treated," or he's saying, so that all in that, I think that has been good.
And I have to say again, for the record, through all of this, that you still take the same volume of complaints.
Yeah.
People still rap your door. Your phone doesn't get switched off. You don't miss meetings. You go to Stormingers regularly now. And long may that continue. A lifetime's investment and struggle, Fra, that spans from jobs, from your family, from where you live, from your happiness, from your well-being. An investment in the struggle. Where is it taking us? Where are you confident where we're going is where we need to be?
Oh, so very, very much so. I think that freedom's within our grasp. I think that we have come on leaps and bounds in terms of the struggle itself, and I think the leadership that we have are the people that are going to take us there. I don't see the struggle any different today as it was in 1971. I think the tools at your hand are different, but I think it's the same objectives, and I think young people, probably in many difficult circumstances, also choose to join the Republican struggle, and I think their commitment is every much as good as the struggle that I joined, and their commitment to that. There are many young people coming through that they're as dedicated and committed as myself or anybody else.
You mentioned just in terms of your illness, and prior to that about your mother and father and your brothers and sisters, and your family have known difficult times.
Yeah.
But you have a long-standing love affair with the community you come from, and you have a long-standing love affair with the family that you're from.
Yeah.
How crucial are those two things for Fra McCann?
Well, none of it probably would have been possible without them, because when you had your downs, they were the people that picked you up and put you on an arrow, and they never wasted an opportunity to tell you how much they care for you and how much they love you. So that has been crucial. And it's just one point, and I meant to actually bring it up during the internment thing. I remember a cousin who was at the sentence day, and Jim McCann, and he's come through a really difficult time. Yeah. I had his leg amputated there a few weeks ago, but I remember back that you could have got a visit, say with you had a relative up at what they call the top end of the camp with an internee, and you could have got a visit with them. Some people would say that it was difficult to get them, but one time my parents were coming up to see me, and we were able to arrange a visit because my sister was in Armagh, and we were able to arrange it. Don't ask me how it was done, but I always remember that my mother and father walking in the visiting box, and my cousin, who is like a brother, myself and my sister were sitting in the visiting box in Long Kesh, and they came in. And I have to say, it was a very, very emotional.
Oh, of course.
My sister Geraldine was interned for a year, and it was a really, really emotional visit. And so there's obviously always a big bond there, and that to me that was crucial to help me on with what I was doing.
I can't add to those words, but
Yeah.
I'm going to finish this interview. Fra McCann, thank you for being Fra McCann.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's a pleasure to do it.